Let's go back to the mid-2000s, which was a period, of course, when the state enjoyed a surge in energy revenues. But as we could see in this graph, energy revenues increased from about $7.6 billion in fiscal 2004 to a high of about $28.1 billion in fiscal 2014. So over that decade, we would have earned over $246 billion in energy revenues. But here now is the fiscal puzzle. Where has all this money gone? Much of these funds, unfortunately, were mismanaged. They were allocated to avenues which added very little to building productive capacity to the economy. In fact, over this period, we spent $229.5 billion in transfers and subsidies alone. Now, understand this figure. That is equivalent to 93% of our energy revenues over that decade. We lost a golden opportunity to diversify the economy. Much of these revenues could have instead been funneled into the non-energy sectors to make them more self-sufficient. We could have used more of these funds, for example, to boost manufacturing activities by investing in more R&D, so that some of the parts, the machinery, the technology that are imported to facilitate manufacturing activities could instead be locally developed. More could have been allotted to agriculture and agro-processing to reduce our high food import intensity. Now, after earning $246 billion in energy revenues, the value of our Heritage and Stabilization Fund and our foreign reserve should have been much higher. Our HSF, as I understand it today, stands in the vicinity of about $5.7 billion. Now, this is equivalent to about 72% of the total budgeted expenditure for this past year. As of July of this year, our foreign exchange reserves stood at about $8.7 billion, representing 9.6 months of import cover. Now, between last year and this year, 1.5 billion of these reserves, over 1.5 billion of these reserves would have been acquired by taking on additional external debt and also tapping into our Heritage and Stabilization Fund, both of which are not very sustainable. Now, as it stands, our past financial mismanagement, together with the drop in revenue earnings, in energy earnings, and a series of policy missteps over several years would have created the somewhat challenging economic times that we're in today. But the globe now is becoming more increasingly competitive, and we're unfortunately being left behind. It's high time that we make serious efforts to diversify away from the hydrocarbon sector, to establish ourselves as a hub for commercial and industrial activity, not just in the Caribbean region, but in the Western Hemisphere. But before we could do this, we have to establish certain conditions, which is what Mr. Hines was alluding to earlier. Firstly, we need to examine a more optimal mix of financing our expenditure in the economy. The downturn in revenue earnings has prompted an increase in the tax base and a rising debt burden in an attempt to earn revenues. Now, taxes are the main source of government revenue globally. But increased taxes have come at a time when business sales have fallen owing to the rising economic downturn, the economic contraction, and they've also contributed to a rising cost of doing business. Now, the overall cost of doing business today has been harmful for many, especially the small and medium enterprises. It's caused some of them to downsize the scale of their operations. Many are not sustaining sufficient profits in order to reinvest and to expend on innovation. Our debt burden has crossed $90 billion and represents a 32% increase in our debt since June 2014, and has now brought the debt to GDP ratio to over 62%. What we're effectively doing, ladies and gentlemen, is borrowing against future growth. But we could very well find ourselves, if we're not careful, of having to tap into our national savings in the future and raise taxes even further to be able to pay off this debt, which naturally could distort or crowd out investments in future national development. What would be more ideal is if we placed less emphasis on debt and more on raising finances through other diverse means. For example, by increased divestments of state enterprises through initial public offerings and some privatization as well, public-private partnerships, consortium financing, and also increased foreign direct investment. For example, in the next 2 years, we can aggressively embark on 5 IPOs, which could assist us in raising about $6 to $7 billion for the economy, which in turn is going to help us to close the fiscal gap. We also need to provide more autonomy, ladies and gentlemen, to the private sector through the privatization of some state entities. Many of them, as we know, are riddled with heavy cost overruns and are overstaffed, and have also been unprofitable for a number of years. In fact, according to the State Enterprise Investment Program document, in 2015, state enterprises would have earned after-tax profits of approximately $1.3 billion. The largest contributor to this would have been NGC. But in the hands of the private sector, however, these companies could be more efficiently run with better corporate governance and better cost management structures. This would also have the benefit of enabling the government to lower their contingent liabilities burden. Now, the recent Global Competitiveness Report for Trinidad and Tobago identified that our 5 most problematic areas for doing business locally are the work ethic of the labor force, inefficient bureaucracy in the state sector, corruption, crime, and of course, foreign exchange regulation. Now, productivity has waned by over 7% between 2015 and 2016. In this avenue, the unions can play a key role in addressing productivity issues. For example, increased bargaining for additional training and retraining opportunities for workers so that their skills are continuously upgraded. They can also take it upon themselves to encourage new processes and organizational structures that could increase efficiency in the workplace. It's also integral that we improve the quality of our state institutions and, of course, the ease of doing business locally. At the moment, for example, dealing with certain customs procedures can be quite arduous, which limits the access to, for some businesses, limits the access to their raw materials to facilitate their operations, or access to the goods that they would have imported for resale locally here. At the moment, we're ranked 96th out of 190 countries in the ease of doing business. Our counterpart here in the Caribbean, Jamaica, is ranked 67th. Certain issues that we need to step up our game, and it deals with issues like granting construction permits. We're ranked 149th out of 190 countries in this. Paying taxes, we're ranked 145th. Trading across borders, we're ranked 123rd. Enforcing contracts, we're ranked 168th. Ease of starting a business, we're ranked a bit better, 69th position, but we can of course do better than that. The issue of corruption, ladies and gentlemen, must be tackled. We've lost possibly billions over the last few decades to corruption, and this in turn would have stifled our competitiveness as well. We keep falling in the corruption perceptions rankings. We're now standing at 101st position. And this not only diminishes confidence in our economy and deters private businesses from wanting to invest further, but it also leads to unnecessary spending and unnecessary additional debt. Because when public finances are lost to corruption, we have no choice but to take out more debt in order to get the additional funds to meet our expenditure commitments. There's also a misallocation of finances to certain projects where some officials in the past could have easily extort bribes, causing us to overspend and not get value for money, especially when it comes to public goods. Crime, ladies and gentlemen, is a serious deterrent to confidence in the business community and also for international investors. In several institutions, it's affected the productivity of the workforce. For instance, some manufacturing firms are finding it difficult to get their employees to work the night shift as they're fearful of being mugged or killed when having to access public transportation in the early hours of the morning. It's also urgent that we strengthen the national tripartite and expand it to include as much stakeholders as possible in each category. This is going to stimulate confidence in the economy and attract much needed inflows of foreign direct investment, which I might add has actually fallen from a high of $2.8 billion in 2008 to negative $68 million in 2016. If we were to satisfy at least most of these conditions, it is going to remove the obstacles to and grant us a more stable path to economic diversification. So I'd now like to outline some practical avenues that I think we can venture into, which could enhance the diversification thrust. These avenues won't necessarily require significant expenditure from the state's coffers, but it could lead to increased revenue streams, exports, and of course foreign exchange earnings. Firstly, with small and medium enterprises downsizing in this day and age, we stand the risk of markets in the long run being more dominated by the larger companies, because they're the ones that can afford to survive, to some extent, of course, higher taxes, and some of them also possess higher levels of savings and in certain cases a better line of credit. A market in the long run that's dominated by the large firms is not what we want, because it will further hamper our competitiveness and also drive up prices even further, among other issues. So to promote the activities of SMEs and their development, the Ministry of Trade could set up an SME infrastructure and investment bank. The purpose of such an institution will be able to assist SMEs in sourcing funding from local and foreign private investors and even foreign governments. The institution can also partner with the Caribbean Industrial Research Institute, or CARIRI, to provide skills training to entrepreneurs on the technical aspects of business, like marketing strategies for export markets, product development, human resources and employee productivity issues, corporate governance issues, etc. They can assist in providing information to these young entrepreneurs in penetrating international markets where the demand for their products are high. Some fiscal incentives could also be offered to facilitate their survival and growth. This could include financial assistance that encourage participation in international trade fairs and trading in global markets. Over time, the state can assist startups by offering programs that are similar to the Singapore model when dealing with SMEs, like the Productivity and Innovation Credit and Tax Savings Program, to encourage entrepreneurs to invest in product research and develop patents within the realm of ICTs and manufacturing. Now, secondly, agro-processing and the agricultural sectors, they have great scope to become net exporters and earners of foreign exchange. And this, ladies and gentlemen, could be facilitated through establishing cooperatives throughout the economy. So in various communities, several farmers could be brought together by a large business entity. You found that many business entities, especially larger ones, would have benefited greatly from the windfall energy gains over the past 13 years. So the large business could contribute a sum of money to purchase agricultural equipment and machinery, and even some agricultural land, as the case may be. The farmers, such as those who would have benefited from carony lands, they could share in the use of this equipment and machinery. If we were to use this model throughout the country, these two industries could grow substantially. It will drive the diversification thrust even further and add to economies of scale in the agricultural sector. We could focus on penetrating markets where the demand for organic foods are quite high, like the United States, Germany, and France. Our agro-processing efforts can focus even more so on contributing organic foods exports. Now, thirdly, we are blessed with a natural harbor and a strategic location that's not only directly above the entire South American economy, but one that also protects us from natural disasters, especially hurricanes. So we ought to capitalize on these and create a new industry that is centered around global logistics and shipping. Now, this could be facilitated through a public-private partnership, where we partner with a foreign entity like the China Shipbuilding and Industry Corporation, which is one of the leading giants in shipping within the Asian subcontinent. Now, through the public-private partnership model, we can prepare the infrastructure to facilitate an increased volume of transshipment and also improve the technological systems to boost the efficiency of customs and lower their administrative costs. Partnering with a global shipping giant will also ensure a transfer of knowledge, a transfer of skill and technology into the shipping industry, together with financing, which of course will save the state some money. There will also be downstream benefits, some companies will spring up which would be involved in maintaining equipment, bunkering services, legal and information technology services, just to name a few. Other oil-based economies have successfully ventured into this industry, like Bahrain, like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Even here in the Caribbean region, our very own counterpart, Jamaica, they're also making significant headway in the maritime and shipping industry. Another low-hanging fruit that we need to leverage off is the financial services industry. Our stock market, it has great potential to be a driver of activity in the financial sector. We need to aggressively engage in a drive that would encourage both local and foreign companies, more local and new foreign companies, to be listed in our stock exchange, and for foreign investors to trade on our stock exchange as well. Now, in doing so, the market is going to grow and, of course, generate additional revenues. The returns offered by the market will also increase, which will make the sector's returns as a whole more competitive and certainly attract more investment into the market and even lower some of the capital flight. We should set a target to increase the number of companies listed on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange to 45 by 2019. We also have the SME market on the stock exchange, which so far has not been utilized by the small companies locally. In Jamaica, however, in their SME market, their junior market as they call it, they have about over 30 registered companies. So in some sense, you could say that their junior market is bigger than our overall Tier 1 market here in Trinidad and Tobago. This avenue, the SME market, must be seriously explored as an avenue for SMEs to earn financing, especially in the short term. Ladies and gentlemen, it's also imperative not just to devise ways to gradually curb expenditure, but also to revise our expenditure pattern. More needs to be allocated or allotted to capital expenditure, as this involves projects that would be able to further enhance our infrastructure, increase access to potable drinking water, upgrade our ICT facilities, our educational health facilities, our public security facilities as well, agro and fish processing facilities, and the list goes on and on. This avenue promotes revenue generation. This avenue is the avenue that really creates sustainable jobs and can take us further towards the diversification thrust. Recurrent expenditure on avenues like CPEP and URP, they need to be stymied and also reallocated to capital expenditure. The same workforce under these unproductive programs could be merged into the PSIP and programs within the PSIP, like the Youth Agriculture Apprenticeship Program, like the Cocoa Rehabilitation Program, or even new tourism-based programs. Instead of CPEP, we could introduce a Farm PEP initiative. That could be used to replace CPEP to promote further agricultural development locally. And finally, last but not least, over time, we can introduce a dollar-for-dollar medical facility. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, one of the key issues we have in the health sector is a lack of specialists. And in addition to that, specialist units that handle, of course, certain types of illnesses and diseases. In fact, sometimes, for example, when individuals from all the way in Rio Claro go to the San Fernando Hospital, they have to wait, even though they're getting there at 4 o'clock in the morning for an 8 o'clock appointment, they're waiting hours upon hours thereafter to see a specialist doctor. We could change all of this through a dollar-for-dollar medical facility, where the state, in collaboration with foreign entities or foreign medical universities, could establish several specialized hospitals locally, including throughout the country. It could be run by both local and foreign practitioners. For each private patient, the model could look like this. For each private patient who pays for a procedure, the state could match the cost by paying the same for another patient's procedure. So if you're going through a surgery for glaucoma and you're paying about $7,000 for it, I'm not sure what the cost of that is now, but another individual who cannot afford the same procedure, cannot afford to pay for that same procedure, there's where the state could step in and pay for it to match the cost of a private patient. Now, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to congratulate the Honorable Prime Minister and the government of Trinidad and Tobago for hosting this event. This initiative will not only boost some much needed economic confidence in the economy, but it will also is a start to creating further synergies among all the groups that are represented here today, which of course is very integral if we are to return to economic prosperity. There is no one-size-fits-all strategy for economic prosperity, ladies and gentlemen, but one of the many strategies that we need to use is a collaborative effort.